monitors and independent media from targeted attacks, rule of law and anti-corruption initiatives that help insulate prosecutors, auditors, and judges from political interference. Now, I know that members of this committee have asked what the administration is currently doing to support these democracy and governance programs. The short answer is clearly not enough. And while the State Department has stated publicly that some of these programs continue to be administered, the reality on the ground is a very different story. The foreign assistance dismantling has terminated or halted the core program lines for democracy, civil society, and election support that this region depends on. My previous bureau, DRL, has undergone a significant structural downgrade, with its entire Western Hemisphere expertise purged and effective elimination of most of its regional programming to support critical work in Honduras. Former U.S. state implementers tell us they are in survival mode, unable to plan, unable to hire, unable to continue critical election integrity and anti-corruption work. And the strategic messaging coming from U.S. leadership today prioritizes deportation and short-term security concerns, not the democracy, rights, and governance work that addresses the root causes driving instability. The consequences are already visible across the region: weaker civic space, diminished oversight, and far greater room for authoritarian and criminal actors to manipulate electoral processes. Now, for decades, Democrats and Republicans alike understood that investing in these democracy and governance programs is not just about values, it is about national security. Restoring and protecting these programs are critical, as we have seen in the lead up to high-risk elections in Honduras and elsewhere in the region. It is in the strategic interest of the United States. So thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. So I think we're all on the same page. We want Honduras to have a free, fair elections November 30th, and that is the reason why we're here. And I have 2 questions, and I can start with you, Ambassador Trujillo, and obviously Deborah, you can always pitch in. Is the current Castro government trying to rig the elections? Yes or no? And if they are, how are they doing? And number 3, what can the United States do in order to stop that effort?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The answer is yes. And how are they doing it? If you look at the way that they've gone after the Electoral Council is composed of 1 member from each party. There are 3 major parties in Honduras. Everyone sends their representative. The Attorney General, who happens to be Rick Moncada, one of the candidates' nephew, has decided to summon the 2 opposition parties to come and testify before his office. The purpose of this testimony is to present criminal charges to ultimately disqualify them from serving in that capacity. Who will be the replacements?
And what's the importance of the National Electoral Council for those that don't understand well? Why are they so important?
The council adjudicates the outcomes of the elections and certifies its results. And the reason it's composed of all political parties, because you want buy-in, you want finality, you want certainty. The fact that those 2 members are being attacked by the actual government and by the nephew of one of the opposition candidates shows you where this election is headed. Furthermore, Redondo, who controls the National Assembly, has already named the replacements. The replacements for partisan positions are not from the same party. They're hand-selected by their government in order to influence the outcome of the election.
What can the United States do at this hour, 10 days out from the election, in order to prevent any type of stealing or rigging the presidential elections? What can we do?
First, I commend you on this hearing. I think the vigilance of this committee and the private statements and influence of members of the committee, sometimes it's difficult to recognize when you're sitting in the seats that you're sitting, the importance of the words that you say and how important they are in country, in Honduras, and how it gives hope
to the Honduran people, the amount of people you see sitting here behind us, who really their hope on saving their democracy is kind of vested in a hearing like this. The other thing is the United States government has a plethora of tools that they could use in order to apply individual sectoral pressure to individuals who violate or usurp the rule of law, who violate or usurp democracy, individuals who commit human rights violations, whether it's in a targeted sanction matter towards an individual or towards an entire institution. I think all those tools are available. And ultimately, the lack of recognition for the legitimacy of these regimes. If they do steal the election and they do go down that road, how does it end? And it has to end without any credible democratic actor recognizing the legitimacy of the regime.
Deborah, if you would like to add, I have a couple of
Yes.
questions for you.
Sure, thank you. I'd like to add on messages that the U.S. and your committee is already giving through this hearing, but messages that can be amplified. That is ensuring the respect for minimum principles of election integrity, ensuring that the elections take place on the planned date, as the OAS Secretary General has said, guaranteeing that party representatives and nonpartisan citizen observers have access to polling stations and the collation centers to ensure transparency and accountability, respecting the independence of electoral institutions so that they can fulfill their mandates, publishing prompt and verifiable results, including polling station level results, and demonstrating the unwavering respect for the will of the people. Thank you.
Mr. Roy, I'm not sure if you feel comfortable answering this question, but the armed forces, there is one of the most respected institutions in Honduras. I just mentioned during my initial statement in 2009, they pulled out of his bed. I was there as a journalist in the middle of the night in PJs, put him on a plane and sent him to Costa Rica because Mel Zelaya wanted to implement communism in Honduras. Now, 16 years after, his wife is doing that job. Just explain to us in which way the armed forces could stop everything that the other witnesses have described.
Yes, so Madam Chairwoman, the armed forces obviously play an important role in the elections in Honduras. They are there to safeguard and ensure the transportation of election materials, and so it's going to be important to have continued vigilance over that role that they're going to be playing and ensure that they're not further politicized, as we've seen some of the statements coming out of heads of the military, particularly against media. And so it is concerning, and that's why, we have electoral observation happening on the ground to ensure that things do go smoothly and in a way that's transparent.
What I just would like to hear from three of you, why have the Honduran armed forces been involved in a way that has not been seen in the last 50 years? There were
I would say through the General Roosevelt and many others, they're much more politicized. The rank and file armed
when
forces.
did that start?
That started under this administration, under Xiomara Castro.
And why did that happen? What incentives did the current president or government has given the top echelon of the armed forces to become more politicized? What happened?
It's absolute loyalty to the executive rather than to the Constitution. And
That has not been the case in Honduras for the last 100 years.
historically, it would be difficult to see the president of the country giving multiple political speeches with high-ranking generals standing behind them.
And then why did that happen? Because I remember when I lived in Honduras that this is the only country in Central America which did not have a guerrilla, right? We would go to Honduras just to rest from El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua. Honduras was like the haven. I would go for the haven, but what happened with those armed forces that kept at bay a guerrilla movement?
The top purge of the armed forces, the top brass of the armed forces have been purged and replaced by ideological loyalists to the regime.
That happened in Cuba, Castro, Chavez, Venezuela.
And Nicaragua.
I yield back, and I recognize Ranking Member Castro for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. That's happening in Donald Trump's America right now, too. On these kinds of hearings, one of the disadvantages that we have here when you're not in the country that we're discussing is that we're not on the ground. We're not in the middle of the action, so to speak. And so we rely on witnesses and experts and others to come and tell us, based on their expertise, what's going on. And it's hard sometimes to sort out what's fact and fiction or exaggeration or hyperbole, and you probably can never be 100% certain of anything that you hear. But I wanted to start with you, Ambassador Trujillo, because you did mention conflicts of interest with the Attorney General and so forth. And I want to commend you for your service as ambassador, U.S. ambassador to the OAS. But also want to ask you about conflicts of interest that you have sitting here today. You are a registered foreign agent, is that correct?
That is correct, but not in Honduras.
You represent the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Guyana, Japan, and Bosnia, is that correct?
And Kenya as well.
And Kenya. You also have, you and your firm have significant corporate clients in Honduras who are actively working against the sitting government, is that correct?
That's not correct.
You have clients in Honduras.
I do have clients in Honduras.
You represent Prospera Honduras?
I do no longer represent Prosper Honduras.
Does your firm still represent Prospera Honduras?
We do not represent Prosper Honduras.
When did you represent them? For what period of time?
Prior to the Trump administration, probably through, it was one of my partners in my firm, probably through the first quarter of this year.
You also represent 2 financial institutions in Honduras, you or your firm?
They're all over Central America, yes.
And so I want to ask you, did you discuss your upcoming testimony with any of your clients before this hearing?
I have not.
Did you get advice?
Ranking member, I'm sorry I'm interrupting. I think we're here for just one purpose, to assure that November 30th are clean and fair elections in Honduras.
Well,
Ambassador Trujillo may have many clients in Honduras, but that does not mean that he does not want the best outcome on November 30th. So I would think we should just concentrate on finding out what's really happening right now and how we can preserve the integrity of those elections.
Oh, Chairwoman, I've never interrupted your time, and you've never interrupted my time. And these are fair questions about a witness, especially when the witness talked about conflicts of interest of others in Honduras. I think it's fair to consider whether there's conflicts of interest being presented to us here today. And so that's why I asked him about the clients that he represented, including Prospera, which was very controversial in Honduras, which was fighting with the government there, involved in litigation and later arbitration. I think that's a significant perspective, and obviously one that you've chosen to discuss this, but I think that folks need to know that. I think that's important.
Well, if you're insinuating, just to be clear, Ranking
Sure.
Member, if you're insinuating that my testimony here is tainted, because 9 months ago I represented, and I didn't even personally represent it, my firm represented Honduras Prospera, which is another asset, American asset, by the way, that was sequestered and taken away by this government and is actually being actively supported not only by the Biden State Department, but also by the Trump one. If you're insinuating that that somehow taints my testimony, it's factually inaccurate.
No, Ambassador, I commended you for your service as ambassador to OAS. I'm not saying that your testimony is tainted, but I want there to be a full understanding about your perspective as a witness. It's very rare that we have a registered foreign agent and a registered lobbyist sit in that chair where you're sitting. That almost never happens. So when it does, I think it's important to discuss that. But I have a question for Mr. Roig really quickly. I want to ask you, actually, Mr. Roig or Ms. Ulmer, both of you have emphasized the importance of independent electoral institutions. Given the deadlock inside the National Electoral Council and the political pressure facing the Tribunal for Electoral Justice, what are the most urgent steps Honduras must take in the next 10 days to restore minimum public confidence in these institutions? There's 10 days left. What has to happen?
Thank you. The independence of the Honduran electoral institutions are vital. And that is not only of the National Electoral Council, but it's also the Electoral Justice Tribunal. They both have important results. One who administers the results, the other who adjudicates any challenges. But it's critical that these institutions are able to fulfill their mandates and ensure credible and transparent elections. I commend the CNE for accrediting, I think, a record number of domestic observers. The Hondurans are doing their part. They have come together, and thousands of volunteer observers have come together to provide oversight and to protect the will of the people. I also commend the private sector for stepping in and providing funding for these observation efforts.
Mr. Roig, if I could just get a quick answer there.
Yeah, in terms, Ranking Member, in terms of what more we can be doing, having worked at the State Department, I would say at this stage it's really important that the State Department be much more vocal between now and November 30th. You know, the silence has been deafening, and so to the extent, I know you tried to get a witness here today, but I think that, you know, the State Department has a critical role to play in demonstrating that it is watching what's happening and showing vigilance over this process. And so I would hope that they would take that to heart in the lead up to the election.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now recognize Congressman Shreve from Indiana.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So we're holding this hearing today, recognizing that the elections are at the end of the month, and Honduras has held democratic elections for 45 years now. But the country continues to struggle with authoritarian governance, leaving these democratic institutions fragile. We see ominous signs. The current AG, Geopolitical, is prosecuting the Electoral Justice Tribunal magistrates who have to certify this election at the end of this month, issued formal charges against the Honduran Supreme Court, ruled that the magistrates have constitutional immunity. It's a case of electoral misconduct, actions reminiscent of the autocratic regimes of the Nicaraguan and Venezuelan governments. Thank you. Ambassador Trujillo, this may seem like an obvious question, but for my edification and for the record, are you concerned about this possibly illegal escalatory action? And what does it say about the state of democracy in Honduras over this 45-year context that we've had the opportunity to observe?
I would say the state of democracy is very, very fragile. If you look at the institutions, if you look at the weaponization of those institutions, if you look at the electoral council, the prosecution of some of the members of opposition parties, I've been to Honduras dozens of times. I spent significant time there during my time as OAS ambassador. I worked with the anti-corruption missions. I know the country relatively well. It's as fragile as I've seen it in recent times, and that's taking into account that the previous president is serving time in federal prison for drug trafficking.
Let me offer another example. The National Electoral Council Liberal Party representative, Anna Paola Hall, resigned after facing threats and intense political pressure from the Castro administration. Ambassador, as you know, the CNE is the independent body responsible for organizing and guaranteeing all elections in Honduras. Mr. Ambassador, what actions did our State Department take in response to the actions taken against Representative Hall by the Castro administration?
I'm not sure of exactly, I'm not a U.S. government official, so I'm not sure of exactly what actions the U.S. State Department took. I'm not sure.
I believe they did have some private consultations with them, but I'm not sure.
Well, I appreciate that. I know that you're not presently in service, and that speaks to the merit in this subcommittee's wish to have a representative of our State Department in service with us for such a hearing today. But I appreciate that, and I don't know if any of our other witnesses have a perspective to offer on that front. And if not, I would yield back. Mr. Roig?
Congressman, I'll just offer up that, you know, on the surface, what we've seen and what I mentioned in my opening statement is the transactional nature of this, the Trump administration with Honduras. If the focus is mainly on deportations with 353 flights just this year alone, then that obviously sends a message to the Castro government of what our interests are. And I think ultimately weakens our leverage on issues like this around the election. And so I don't know behind the scenes what kind of discussions might have had on specifically to your question, but again, on the surface, I think we can all see what's happening here, and that, you know, having been a State Department official, you don't want to give up that much leverage when the other side knows exactly what you're all about when it comes to the bilateral relationship.
Sir, how are the democracy watchers in your organization funded? You'll be on the ground in Honduras? We have a representative of your organization on the ground.
My organization
elections-
will not be on the ground. We're not currently operating in Honduras, but my colleague here can speak to that.
Please.
Yes, sir. We are currently funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. They funded our pre-election assessment, which was bipartisan in August, and they are helping fund us for providing technical assistance to a national observation initiative that will be observing in large numbers on Election Day.
Thank you. My time's expired and I yield back.
Yeah. Thank you, Congressman Sharif from the state of Indiana. Now I recognize Mr. Stanton from the state of New Mexico
Close.
for 5 minutes.
We, Arizona and New Mexico, like each other very much, but the Southwest, we got to hang together. No, it's okay.
Hey, listen, they gave me the, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm very sorry. Arizona. Sounds a little bit better than New Mexico. Thank you. Yes,
But thank you, Madam Chair, for convening this hearing. Thank you for our witnesses for being here today, particularly on very short notice. We understand that you were asked to appear before this committee in very short notice, and I associate my comments with a lot of the comments made by our chair and our ranking member about the critical importance of free, fair, democratic elections in Honduras. I also associate myself with the comments of Representative Castro. We wouldn't need a registered lobbyist before us if the Trump administration had sent their representatives, because we have some very tough questions for the Trump administration and their policy in the Western Hemisphere. And I don't diminish the importance of these critical upcoming elections in Honduras at the end of the month and the serious threats to free and fair elections, taking a page out of some of Maduro's bag of tricks, if you will, to usurp free and fair election. These matters deserve our attention. But for me, it is unfathomable that this single topic would dominate our first hearing in over half a year. We have not met as a subcommittee in more than 6 months. During that time, the Trump administration has been carrying out unchecked actions that fall squarely within the purview of the Foreign Affairs Committee and this particular committee. The president continues to halt foreign assistance, leaving the door wide open to greater PRC influence. He's threatened Brazilian officials who convicted his friend Bolsonaro of attempting a coup. He has illegally deported immigrants to El Salvador, where they were tortured, according to a recent report by Human Rights Watch. And the Foreign Affairs Committee has remained, for the most part, silent. Congress has failed to provide the American people with any meaningful debate or discussion about these consequential actions. There has been no attempt to demand justification under our Constitution. Just as my Republican colleagues have made no real attempt to check the president's abuse of tariff authority, my Republican colleagues seem to content to let him impose tariffs as high as he chooses, on any country he chooses, for any reason he chooses. Consequences for American consumers and businesses be damned. Again and again, the GOP-led Congress is missing in action on these critical issues. But nowhere is this abdication more dangerous than in Venezuela. President Trump has usurped Congress war powers. He has unilaterally declared hostilities and launched lethal attacks without congressional authorization. The administration has provided no credible rationale to Congress or the American people for these actions. The Pentagon hasn't even provided evidence that the people they've struck are narco traffickers. Congress has made importation of illegal drugs into the United States a felony offense to be prosecuted in our courts with severe criminal penalties, and American officials are already doing that work, like the women and men of the U.S. Coast Guard and the DEA. Now, though, the administration has deployed an invasion-level force in the Caribbean, 15,000 troops, a carrier strike group, a nuclear submarine, and military aircraft. The largest military buildup in the region since the Cuban Missile Crisis, for what they claim is a counter-narcotics mission. And the president has openly threatened land strikes in Venezuela, despite his own administration assuring lawmakers that there were no such plans and that they lacked legal justification. This is a stunning escalation to the brink of war in the Western Hemisphere. The president believes he can act as judge, jury, and executioner, and no one will stop him. My colleagues across the aisle have given him no reason to think otherwise. Make no mistake, Nicolas Maduro's regime is illegitimate and undemocratic, and I am constantly inspired by Maria Corina Machado and her fight to advance democracy in Venezuela. But the history of U.S. military intervention in Latin America and the Caribbean should warn us that military action may not lead to the democratic transition the Venezuelan people desire and for which they voted peacefully in 2024. These actions put U.S. soldiers at risk. They erode our relationships across the hemisphere. Already, one of our closest allies, the United Kingdom, suspended intelligence sharing with the United States over concerns with these killings. Ranking Member Meeks has introduced a war powers resolution to halt the Trump administration's unauthorized military actions, a resolution I am proud to back. The American people do not want another forever war with loosely defined goals, fought without so much as a debate. That is not what they elected us to do, and that is not what our Constitution permits. So, Madam Chair, I appreciate this hearing. It is an important matter, but I wanted to address what I consider some incredibly constitutional threats to our democracy by the actions of Venezuela. I yield back.
Honorable Representative Stanton from the state of Arizona, I very much appreciate your comments. I do agree. I think that we should send the message that regardless whether we have a representative from the State Department or not, that we are united, Democrats and Republicans, in sending a message to the Hondurans and to the armed forces in Honduras that they should preserve the integrity of the elections coming on November 30th. Don't we agree on that?
Well said.
And we also agree, as Republicans and Democrats, members of the Subcommittee of Western Hemisphere, that Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela is a threat to democracy in the Western Hemisphere. Not only that, I think that you forgot to mention that he is the head of one of the drug cartels called the Sons Cartel. Not only that, he was indicted in 2020 in a federal grand jury for drug trafficking. He stole the elections 70-30, and the legitimate president of Venezuela is hiding in a tunnel somewhere in Caracas, waiting for the United States to do what we need to do, which is to maintain this hemisphere free for fair elections and for democracy and for freedom. I think that you agree with me, don't you?
Thank you very
but
much.
I think that you missed out on saying those.
Of course, and I look forward to a hearing on that matter at our next
And we will,
next week.
and I'm sure that you will be here. Thank you very much for your words. Now I'm going to give the opportunity to Congresswoman Kamagar Dove of California. Thank you. I yield back and give you 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thankfully you didn't say from Texas.
Right, or from Arizona.
That would be a
That's
compliment if you said
Ooh. Oh, that's right. Madam Chair, thank you for holding this meeting, this hearing. And it is absolutely ridiculous that 11 months into the year, this subcommittee has not had a single administration official come to testify on any issue on the Western Hemisphere. If nothing else, it is a vivid display of the total lack of respect this administration has for my Republican colleagues, your constituents, and their expectation of your acquiescence. But it is not surprising. Trump has completely sidelined Congress as a co-equal branch of government, and nowhere is that more apparent than in his Latin America policy, a region that demands better from us and actually deserves our thoughtful attention, like talking about free and fair elections in Honduras. In the time that this subcommittee has failed to exercise its constitutional oversight duty or play any meaningful role in the United States foreign policy toward Latin America, the Western Hemisphere has become ground zero for the administration's illegality. Trump has deported people with no due process in violation of the Constitution to a maximum security gulag-like prison in El Salvador. His tempered tariffs on Mexico, rooted in an abuse of IEPPA authorities, have inflated prices on the produce and coffee we get from our largest trading partner, hurting my constituents in LA and Americans across the country. Trump has slapped 50% tariffs on Brazil, with whom we have a trade surplus, just to prevent his political ally, Jair Bolsonaro, from being convicted of a coup attempt inspired by Trump's own January 6th insurrection. Trump revoked TPS for Venezuelan, Honduran, Nicaraguan, and Haitian legal immigrants, thousands of whom reside in your district, Madam Chair, and I know you've been trying to work on that. It is to the point that Republican donors are calling Republicans out to do something. He has executed a $40 billion bailout to Argentina during a government shutdown, where he refused to spend $4 billion in SNAP emergency funds to feed his own constituents in this country. And I haven't even gotten to the second elephant in the room, because the first elephant is this: no one from Secretary of State, no one from State Department or an administration official is here. But the second elephant in the room The reason this administration is running scared from Congress and refused to show up is because Latin America has become a staging ground for Trump's blatantly illegal use of military force abroad and his trampling of the Constitution. To date, the administration has conducted 21 strikes in the Caribbean, killing at least 83 people. And its justification? That it can target whoever it wants, wherever it wants, as long as it claims that they are drug traffickers, with or without evidence. And these illegal strikes just got even more illegal, because if the administration does want the authority for these strikes, the War Powers Act requires that they come to Congress for an authorization of military force 60 days after it first enters into hostilities. It has been 77 days since the administration informed Congress of the strike. The 60-day war powers deadline has come and gone, and the administration has refused to follow the law and seek an AUMF from Congress. The illegality of this military action is provoking a crisis within our armed forces. The admiral at U.S. Southern Command, which is overseeing the boat strikes, retired rather than be complicit in this illegal behavior. And yesterday, NBC News reported that the senior military lawyer at Southcom believed the strikes could amount to extrajudicial killings, but he was overruled by senior administration officials, meaning the administration knowingly broke the law. Which brings me to Venezuela, where we are returning to the Cold War. Just yesterday, Trump reportedly authorized CIA plans for covert action inside the country. In an era of great power competition and limited resources, he has diverted significant naval capabilities to South America, including our most advanced carrier. And he has not provided a single briefing to either chamber of Congress on these outrageous plans. I don't know a single voter whose top issue in 2024 or even this past November was launching a ground invasion of Venezuela. I have to say, Madam Chair, you are a strong sister, and you deserve more than this. And you should not let them do you like this. You should not let them do any of us like this. And I support you as you continue to demand that administration officials show up and testify before this body. If you have nothing to hide, then you should have everything to share. And it is okay to sit before us and have to answer uncomfortable questions. But you should at least have the decency to respect this body. We are moving into a moment that is shameful, it is dystopian, and it is a dereliction of duty. And none of us want those subscriptions attached to our names and our work and our commitment to this region. Madam Chair, I thank you for holding this meeting. I actually have two things I would like to enter into the record asking unanimous consent. You know, I got so worked up because I know you care about this region. You know I care about this region. I know you care about your people, and we care about doing what's right. I would like to enter into I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an NBC News title article, Top Military Lawyer Raised Legal Concerns About Boat Strikes. And I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record open letter to the Miami-Dade delegation, Defend Immigrants Now. It is an opinion op-ed in the Miami Herald.
Thank you. I appreciate your words. I agree with some of them. Thank you, Congresswoman Kim Rager-Dove, of course, of California. And now I recognize Congressman Randy Fine from the beautiful and marvelous state of Florida. 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. I'm new to the committee, or the subcommittee, having just been added to Foreign Affairs shortly before the August recess. It's an honor to be here and be discussing the subject. I want to talk about why I think this is important, why we should care, because that's really what many of my constituents ask me on all of these issues of international relations. Why should they care? And I'm going to give my reason, then I've got a couple of questions. I worry about this because we clearly have a problem in Venezuela with narco-trafficking, trafficking of drugs. And I am incredibly grateful to President Trump for showing such leadership and saying, I'm not going to let these drugs come into our country. And I fully applaud and support everything that he is doing there. But Attorney General Bondi stated in August of this year that the Venezuelan regime is paid for access to Honduran airspace to transport cocaine without detection. And that bothers me, and so we should care because Honduras's geographic position makes it critical for us to stop this. It also matters because we have to worry about geopolitical competition. We have to worry about a world in which China wishes to be ascendant, and as they come into our part of the world, the Western Hemisphere, we need to be cognizant of that. And as we've seen in Honduras, that is a risk. And then finally, I am very focused on the pitfalls of illegal immigration and the extraordinary damage that it has done to my constituents in the state of Florida with higher criminal costs, higher health care costs, higher education costs, higher insurance costs, and higher housing costs. And it's my view that all illegal immigrants, every single one, should be sent home. And so the last thing we need is to create situations where more want to come to our country. So I think for all of these reasons, we need to be concerned about what is happening in Honduras. So I have a question for the ambassador, who I served with in the Florida House, and it's always an honor to see you here. Honduras was among only 4 Latin American countries, along with Bolivia, Cuba, and Nicaragua, that recognized Maduro's fraudulent election in July of 2024. How does that fact reflect on their commitment to democratic norms, and what does that say we should be concerned about with the election that's coming up in just a few days?
Thank you, Congressman. Great to see you. It's a complete abandonment of traditional democratic norms. No serious country, center-left, center-right, Republican, Democrat, recognized the Maduro election. And the ones who did recognize it recognized that Maduro was not elected, and Maria Corina Machado, through El Mundo, was actually the elected representative of the country of Venezuela. But I think it speaks much deeper to their long-term plans. When you recognize fraudulent elections, when you participate in fraudulent elections, when you celebrate fraudulent elections, it really is their modus operandi of what they plan to do in the next 10 days. And I think all the steps they've taken, the state of emergency, the politicization of the Attorney General being related to one of the candidates, the elimination of the Electoral Council, the replacement of the Electoral Council, the military being involved in the election, it's all the roadmap to what's to come. We hope it doesn't get there.
So my follow-up, and actually I'll ask this for all of you, but I'd ask you keep your answer to sort of 10 seconds, is do you have, each of you have legitimate concerns that the outcome of the election will not be free and fair and something that we can take great confidence in? Or are you saying, no, we can count the votes and we'll know where we are the next day?
I have concerns.
I would say we would have concerns if the CNE and the TJE are not allowed to do their jobs.
Okay, and do you think they'll be allowed to do their jobs? I'll get to you in a second, sir, but do you think they'll be allowed?
We hope so, and we hope that this hearing is sending a strong message.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with my colleagues here that we definitely have concerns, but I would also just note quickly that this problem of authoritarianism isn't one just on the left, it's also one on the right. I will note that El Salvador, Bukele has imprisoned Ruth Lopez, a civil society activist.
Not the subject of the hearing today. I got a minute and 8 seconds left. So I've got another question for my friend the ambassadors. Do you assess that the pattern of prosecuting electoral judges, forcing resignations of opposition CNA representatives, releasing allegedly fabricated audio recordings, mirrors the authoritarian playbook that we've seen in Venezuela and Nicaragua? And what are your thoughts on that?
It was actually copyright written by the Cubans and then exported across the region. I agree with your assessment.
Well, I share that concern. We obviously want great relationships with our neighbors. To me, it's less about who wins an election. It's more about can you have confidence in them. And I think you all have raised grave concerns about what's going to happen. I hope that the Hondurans are able to have a free and fair election and that we can continue to have great relations with the country. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Fine. Now I recognize Representative Titus from the state of Nevada for 5 minutes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Lo siento, no hablo español muy bien. Un poquito, nada más. Ojalá que mejore. I'm glad that
That accent is really good.
Thank you, thank you. It's a little southern accent. That's it. Well, I'm glad that after 11 months of the administration that we are finally having a hearing that is really focused on the Western Hemisphere, because that's what our committee is supposed to be looking at, and it's taken us a while to get here. Now, in the meantime, we have seen Trump threaten to seize the Panama Canal. He has renamed the Gulf of Mexico. He has given $40 billion to Argentina. He has threatened military strikes against Mexico. He has bombed boats in the Caribbean without legal justification. He has slapped crippling tariffs on our partners in North and South and Central America, which has resulted in skyrocketing prices for my constituents. And now he's just itching to invade Venezuela and talking about covert activities there. We haven't addressed any of that up until this point, and yet it is happening as we speak, all of these things going on in the hemisphere. Now, that's not to minimize the importance of what's happening in Honduras and the value of democratic institutions there and elsewhere, but it's merely to highlight the fact that the committee knows what the Trump administration is doing in Latin America. It is creating chaos throughout the hemisphere. It is not advancing U.S. interest in the region. It's not making our constituents in this country or throughout the region safer, stronger, or more prosperous, and it's not how this country should be doing foreign policy. Republicans on this committee know that if we talk about those things, they may lose the narrative on any of these issues, so we have just diverted attention away from everything else that's going on there. And especially now that we know the president probably doesn't have any trouble putting boots on the ground in the foreign country. So I would ask you, Mr. Rhodes, do you think that the chaos that the administration has wrought throughout the hemisphere could have any negative impacts on Honduras, on its institutions going beyond the election, migration policy, security challenges, other things? I mean, the election is just one day. Then you got to deal with the future. How is all this chaos going to impact what happens next?
Yes, Congresswoman, as I stated in my opening statement, the Trump administration has largely operated a very transactional approach to the region. With Honduras, there have been 353 deportation flights this year alone, and so it's very obvious to the Castro government, if they play ball on that count, they can get away with a lot of other stuff. And so that's of concern to many of us. On Venezuela, my organization, Human Rights First, has been pretty vocal that what is happening with the boat strikes amounts to extrajudicial killings, particularly without any evidence. We all know that fentanyl is not coming from Venezuela, it's coming through Mexico. And so it's really, at the end of the day, a dysfunctional game of whack-a-mole that is being played out right now in the Caribbean and probably will have no impact on drug markets here in the U.S. Just a month ago, I was up in Baltimore doing police ride-alongs at drug markets, and I can't tell you the number of fentanyl needles that were all over the ground in these neighborhoods. So very hard to imagine that any of this is going to have any impact on that, what the Trump administration says they're trying to do. And at the last point, we have to be consistent when we call out left-leaning authoritarian regimes. There are also, as I said earlier, ones on the right. Bukele in El Salvador has demonstrated authoritarian tendencies. You've seen Cristosal, one of the leading human rights organizations, which has had to leave the country because one of their anti-corruption activists is now currently in prison. So let's be consistent also in the sense of how we deal with these issues.
Well, do you think cutting off foreign assistance for democracy and good government programs would make a difference? That's been a negative impact on this notion that we need free and fair elections. You've got no NDI, no IRI down there working on these issues because we've cut off all that foreign aid.
I'll say definitely the dismantling of USAID and the cut in assistance that my bureau, DRL, provided definitely has had an impact on electoral observation, support to civic activists, to media outlets, other organizations. NDI has been able to continue their operation at a reduced scale, but we would be in a different position if we had a much more robust foreign assistance apparatus at this point that we could have started much sooner to prepare the way for the elections on November 30th in Honduras.
Well, we've heard a lot of testimony here about how the Honduran people have low trust in their government and they're not confident that these elections are going to be free and fair. Do you think having the chairwoman of this committee say, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but don't vote for the communists, is that going to help increase trust in the electoral process, or think that it's fair and being done in Honduras and not with a thumb on the scale from somewhere else?
Well, Congresswoman, obviously we want to maintain impartiality in all of this, but it is important to call out the irregularities that we are seeing currently on the ground, and so I think that's what we've all stated here in our opening testimonies, that there are things that do concern us on what's happening in Honduras, But again, I'll go back to my point. Let's be consistent and call it out on both the left and the right when we see governments that are demonstrating authoritarian tendencies on both sides of the political side.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Titus from the state of Nevada. Now I recognize Congressman McKenzie from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate today's hearing. Obviously, Honduras is a key U.S. partner in Central America, and we want to make sure that they are secure and prosperous and maintaining a good relationship with our country. We also want to work with the Honduran government to address shared challenges in the region, like drug trafficking and reducing crime. And so have a couple questions. I'll follow up on election irregularities, which we just touched on a little bit, but I'm also concerned about what the elections and irregularities, how they can affect our ability to work together, and what it also means for China's growing influence in the region. And so, Ambassador Trujillo, during your tenure as ambassador to the OAS, Honduras shifted diplomatic relations from Taiwan to China. And in your estimation, what factors drove that decision, and how have you seen Chinese influence expand in the country since the decision?
Thank you. It happened after my term in the OAS, but they did shift, and they campaigned on breaking diplomatic relationship with Taiwan in order to favor China. China's been significantly much more active, not only in Honduras, but in the region. If you look at the last 10 years, from Honduras to Panama to the Dominican Republic, I'm sure I'm missing a few, but a lot of those countries have shifted their diplomatic relationships to Taiwan, from Taiwan to China. And in Honduras in particular, they've been significantly aggressive in providing intelligence, in providing some communication support, in providing telecom support, and also providing strengthening diplomatic ties, including multiple state trips from Honduran high-ranking officials, including the president, to Beijing.
So just to highlight again and expand on what you said there about how they had campaigned on that. Tell me how that played in the elections, or how did that contribute to the outcome of the elections?
Well, they actively campaigned on having more normalized relationship, and they always obviously paint it as trade, right? This economic engine of China, we're going to have trade. It's going to help grow our economy. It's played out throughout the rest of Latin America. It's never been the case. China is really good at importing. They're really bad at purchasing exports. So I think that continues to be the case. Going forward, it'll be interesting to see if the candidates from the opposition switch to diplomatic recognition, and whether they leave from Beijing back to Taipei.
And do you think the decision to make that a part of the political campaign in the election was driven by Hondurans, or was that driven by the Chinese?
I think by both. I would say the Honduran officials who accepted the challenge and the Chinese who provided the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. We were pleased to see that the Deputy Secretary of State's statement last week on the upcoming Honduran elections, he echoed the concerns of the OAS. What were those concerns, and what are the concerns that you have regarding the elections, potential irregularities, and what we should be looking for, because we do want to make sure that there are free and fair elections occurring there?
I think the poor functioning primaries were an indicator of what's to come. The delay in the vote counting, the military's active role, the military taking possession of ballots and not having a lot of transparency for all parties involved, including civil society. And I think going forward, it's really the role, as some of my colleagues have said on this panel, of the Electoral Commission. If they're truly allowed to be independent, I'm not saying it'll 100% change the outcome, but at least we'll have the information to verify the outcomes of the election. The question becomes whether
Honduran government officials are going to allow them to fulfill their role. And the next 10 days will determine it, but it seems they're increasingly putting more and more pressure on the independence of the Electoral Council.
All right, well, thank you again to all of you for being here today. Obviously, a great topic of interest that we're following very closely in the region, and appreciate your input and testimony today. And with that, I yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Congressman McKenzie from Pennsylvania. And we're about to wrap this up. I think that we have been able to send a very clear message to the Hondurans, those who are watching this hearing back in Honduras, Tegucigalpa, and whatever other area in the country, that regardless whether we agree or not, Democrats and Republicans, you have seen that we have not always agreed on every single topic, but we have sent a very clear message how the American democracy works. And that is exactly what we want for Honduras and for the rest of Central America. We're sending a very clear message, Republicans and Democrats from the United States House of Representatives, that we want fair, clean elections, transparent elections, and for the Hondurans to decide their future for the next 4 years. With that, I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and they could be responded in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, or other materials for the record, subject to the length of the limitations. And I'm going to say a few words before we close, once again in Spanish, to the Hondurans who are watching this committee. Usually this has to be done in English, but since we are talking about our very close ally en Central America, es un mensaje muy claro el que estamos enviando desde el Congreso Federal. Ustedes han visto que aquí estamos demócratas y republicanos. No siempre estamos de acuerdo en lo que estamos diciendo, pero sí estamos de acuerdo en una sola cosa, que queremos que Honduras tenga un gobierno libre, democrático, y que las elecciones del próximo 30 de noviembre sean limpias y claras. With that, may the Lord help the Hondurans and Honduras. With that, this committee stands adjourned.